Welcome to Digging Deeper Ag Chats with Al, the podcast exploring the trends, challenges and innovations shaping agriculture. I'm your host, Alistair McCallum from the Gippsland Agriculture Group. Each episode, I'll chat with experts and producers to bring you insights and practical advice from soil to livestock. We'll be digging deeper to keep you informed and ahead of the game. So let's get started. Welcome to Digging Deeper. We've got a familiar voice, Chelsea, behind the mic with us.
Thanks again, Al, for having me. It's always a blast.
Now, this might be a bit of a nice little reprieve from your day. You're just saying that you've had a mental day today. Tell us about your day.
Oh, it's been... I don't know if I can say it's been a mental week or month or even year at this point. It's just been really busy in general. Yeah, we've finally finished up the spring preg testing, but we've had a few strange things like abortions, keeping me busy, going out and calving cows that are not meant to calve for another 6 weeks, which has been quite challenging. Still doing a lot of disbudding of little dairy calves from autumn and troubleshooting some bull problems as well. So yeah, for what's meant to be a quiet month, it hasn't felt very quiet at all, and we're doing a lot of workshop rollouts at the moment as well, which has kept both of us busy. So that has definitely taken a lot of time out of the schedule to fit all that stuff in as well. So yeah, it's busy, which is good, but yeah, it's been really cold too, so I feel like that's slowed me down a little bit. But anyways,
yeah, well, my hands are still cold from being outside and they're not working properly, and when you're rushed and your fingers aren't working and everything else, it just makes it hard, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just feels like you can't move as quick as you normally do. But anyway, that's part of it.
Yeah. Now, you did say a little while ago that these are your quiet months. Are you quietening off now, or do you think it's just going to be something that you're busy all the way through now?
The clinical work is backing off, definitely. But yeah, like I said, we do a lot of workshops to plug that time between calving seasons. So yeah, we've got a lot of better beef days coming up and doing a couple of workshops for land care and AgVic as well.
Have you running some PDSs as well at the minute?
Yeah, we do have a PDS going as well, actually, and that's actually kept us really busy also.
Do you want to talk about that just quickly?
Yeah, actually that's a great idea. Yeah, so we're running a PDS which is funded by Meat and Livestock Australia. And yeah, we're looking at 8 different farms across the region at their post-weaning growth rates. And so for this year, what we're doing is just weighing those animals every 6 weeks and just looking at their pasture, their worm egg counts, their blood tests for liver fluke exposure and trace element balance, just to see if there's any reason or way in which we could maybe modify that person's animal husbandry to enhance weight gains. And then for the second and third year of the project, we'll be splitting those two. We're splitting the next cohort of weaners for the next 2 years into demonstration and control groups and seeing if we can make a bit of an improvement to post-weaning growth rates. And we have seen some interesting results. We've seen a couple with worm burdens, and we've diagnosed some fluke somewhere we didn't expect to see fluke.
How long are we into the PDS?
This is the first year, and yeah, most of the calves got weaned from the start of the year, so some of those
Is this weighty weaners, or is that another
that's
thing?
correct. It's the focus on weighty weaners, PDS, right. That's right.
Yeah, an interesting fact, we actually just bought some heifers who were part of that program.
Oh,
for
right.
the research farm here, so they're turning up on Monday because before they went, we said, we have to make a phone call about the weighty weaners, so I didn't actually know what that means, but that means
good to provide some context.
There you go. And what have you found so far? Is there anything you're starting to find, or you got some theories about different things yet?
We're just collecting information at the moment, and at the end we're going to do a big meeting and compare and contrast results across different farms.
So a 2-year program?
It's a 3-year project.
3 years.
Yeah. So this year we're just, like I said, just making observations on what are the expected growth rates and what's the feed quality that's feeding into those growth rates, and is there worms popping up, is there fluke popping up, things like that. And then for years 2 and 3 we'll be doing demonstration and control groups, and we'll be making some modifications based on the first year of the project and seeing if we can make some demonstrable changes to post-weaning growth rates, just with some very subtle changes, whether that be going from short-acting selenium injections to a bolus, just as an example. Or
selenium chips, that's all the rage at the minute.
Yeah. Or instead of using a pour-on drench, do we look at using something that's got a bit better use of activity? So, yeah, there's just little things that we're looking at doing just to enhance efficiency, essentially.
Yeah. And so in the next, do you follow those weaners through their life at all, or is it just
it's only the
new
post-weaning phase. So each year we'll get a new cohort of
Right.
weaners, which is obviously a confounding sort of variable, but we're going to, in years 2 and 3, repeat it obviously twice to see if we can get consistent results with changes in husbandry. But also, because we'll have that control group across both years as well, there will be a demonstration and control to see if we're making a major difference. So.
Yeah, because seasonally it will be quite significantly different test.
That's exactly right. There could be changes in season that we'll need to account for. So
hopefully another good one for everyone that's part of the program.
Yep.
Okay, so today we're actually a similar topic, I guess. We're talking about calving preparation and management and lambing preparation and management. Which one's more difficult?
Calvings or lambings?
Yeah.
Oh, from a vet's perspective, definitely calvings.
Well, I'll start with calving and finish. We'll get the heavy stuff out of the road. What can you tell us? Where do we start?
Oh, look, I think preparation's a big part of it. Thinking a good couple of months out from calving, where are you going to calve your cows? Where did we calve the cows last year, so that we're not using the same paddock year in, year out? Having a think about...
Is that for disease burden?
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the pathogens that can cause disease in calves, particularly scours, will last from year to year if the soil's quite waterlogged and doesn't get too hot through the summer. So, yeah, if we can try and change the calving paddock annually, that's always a good start. It just prevents that build-up of pathogens like crypto and salmonella from accumulating over successive years.
All right, we've got paddocks in mind and the cows are scanned, preg tested in calf. What's the next step? How far out do we start concerning ourselves about nutrition? What health treatments are we doing?
Or at least 4 to 6 weeks. So we always like to try, particularly if we've got calf scour vaccinations in the program, to get those boosters done ideally 4 to 6 weeks before calving. And the reason for that is that it improves the colostral quality that goes onto the calves. And for the same reason, if it's possible, getting an extra 7-in-1 into those cows when they're starting to form colostrum is good as well. It just gives a little bit more trickle down of antibodies into the calves as well. So when the calves have their first drink off their mothers and they get their first colostrum, that will have better quality if they're vaccinated closer to calving.
Does any of it go through the placenta?
No, so that's the whole importance of colostrum, is that there's no transfer of antibodies within the placenta itself, unlike people. So it's to do with the structure of the cattle placenta compared to, and that's the same for
same
horses.
with sheep, like ruminants?
Yeah, any ruminants, but also horses, dogs, cats. It's because of the structure of that placenta, whereas the blood component of, and I'm not a human doctor, obviously, but it's to do with how a human's placenta, there's a lot more contact with the actual blood and the fetus. So the implication is that when people get diseases, they can transfer them more readily to their children as well, whereas we don't have as much of a problem. There is some of an issue with transfer from dams to offspring. But yeah, with that placental structure, what it does mean is there is no transfer of antibodies whatsoever, so they have to get it from the colostrum. And that's why vets sort of bang on about it so much, is because otherwise, if they don't get that colostrum within 24 hours of birth, but ideally 12, really 24 is pushing it, those animals aren't going to have much of an immune system at all.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we bottle feed lambs, that first 3 days completely fine, and then the 4th or 5th day it just drops dead, and that's if they haven't had colostrum. But if they've had colostrum, you're pretty much guaranteed that they'll be right.
Yeah. When they don't have that colostrum, you've got to view them like a kid that's getting chemotherapy. Like, the immune system's just not there, really. So even though they might seem fine, the slightest little disease will just bowl them over so much easier.
Yeah. What about cattle colostrum for lambs?
Not preferable, just because the antibodies that go into the colostrum are specific to that species disease profile, bovine herpes virus and salmonellas and things like that cattle are uniquely susceptible to. They need cattle-specific colostrum for. And on that note, I'm not a huge fan of the freeze-dried colostrum. I think in a pinch, if you've got nothing else, that's great, but nothing really beats the the actual colostrum.
Yeah.
From
What
the
about
mother.
just frozen colostrum?
Frozen's fine. You've just got to, you can't stick it in the microwave. It's got to be put in a proper water bath.
Yep.
And the other thing also, just on that note, that we do see occasionally is if you're a beef farmer and getting some colostrum from a dairy farm, you just got to be a bit mindful that it actually can be an unfortunate way to bring diseases in as well. Sometimes everything's a risk, but certainly just keep that in the back of your mind, especially when sourcing colostrum for your calves. And that's why, like, if I ever pull a calf and it's dead on farm, I'll often encourage farmers to just strip it and stick it in the freezer, because you just never know when you might need it.
So you said 4 weeks is ideal for those vaccines and different programs. Too close is an issue, or too far out is an issue?
Yeah, so it's ideally 4 to 6 weeks is ideal. Otherwise, if you miss the boat, it can be just too late and the colostrum's already starting to form. But yeah, around that month mark is optimal.
Yeah. Now, I'm not really a cattleman yet. We've got some on the farm, but I'm a bit of a novice. Do we drench, a pre-calving drench?
For heifers, definitely, because heifers are still themselves developing a full immunity to the world around them. So certainly for heifers, and particularly and specifically with autumn calving heifers, there is a bit of a syndrome because they're under a lot of stress, and often there's less feed available in autumn compared to spring, that we can get that type 2 osteotargia at calving with autumn calving heifers as well. So the osteotargia is sitting in the gut lining, inhibited, and then because these heifers go through a lot of stress at their first calving, all those larvae that have been sitting in the gut lining just all of a sudden decide to kick into the abomasum at the same time, and can cause real serious disease and even death. Especially for heifers, a pre-calving drench is definitely recommended. But for cattle, as they get older, we are moving further and further away from doing annual drenches.
Is that for a drench resistance?
Yeah, that's right. And because often older cattle, they develop an age-acquired immunity to a lot of the worms that we see anyways. There is a bit of an exception with first and second calvers that we say if they're in low body condition, it's probably worth just giving them a drench. But if they're in good condition, they're in good working order and they look healthy, there doesn't appear to be any indication to give them one whatsoever.
Let's keep on going on with the separation between heifers and cows. You just mentioned there that, I don't know if you did mention it, but that they're still growing, obviously, the heifers, so they're going to need a different nutritional.
Yeah, that's right. Because, as you said, your heifers are still growing, so they not only have an energy requirement for maintenance and for growth, but obviously for the pregnancy and then going into lactation as well. So heifers that are at their peak lactation represent, on a beef farm, probably the biggest energy consumers for that window of period. So they really need good quality nutrition. And the problem is you won't necessarily get caught out at calving if they're on less than ideal nutrition. But what we do see is that they struggle to get back in calf. And so there's this real syndrome of, what I see as a vet is often when we go to do a preg test, those heifers just fail to get back in calf because if their nutrition boxes aren't all ticked, they don't ovulate particularly well. And there's a lot of data that will show that they will have a delayed onset to cyclicity after calving if all those nutritional boxes haven't been ticked. Yeah. So they represent a massive challenge to get back in calf as well. Often it's actually easier to get the heifer pregnant than it is to get it pregnant the second time.
There's obviously always concern about big calves.
Yeah.
Where are we managing that feed?
I think being mindful of body condition in the lead up to calving, we certainly don't want them in a condition score 3 or above. We really want them at that sweet spot of a condition score 3 leading up to calving. But as soon as they've calved, you really need to be basically offering them as much good quality feed as you can get into them.
Yep. Yeah. And there's probably going to be a fair few skinny cattle around just because of the nature of the drought that's going on everywhere. If we do have light cows and heifers that are close to calving, is there any risk of big calves if we're trying to just get weight on them? Will they grow that calf inside them quicker than they can put weight on themselves, or...?
I think I'd have to go back to my notes. My understanding is it's actually the second trimester is when the calf grows quicker. So the last few weeks, there's not a major influence of the nutrition, but the concern is that if you fatten the animals up too quickly, fat gets deposited into the pelvic canal very readily. So we do try and get people to be a little bit cautious. We want to keep them, obviously, in good enough condition that they're not a welfare concern, but the bigger problem is stacking the weight on that they preferentially will put weight into internal body store reserves, and that can represent a bit of a calving risk as well.
All right, so get the calf out before we go to...
Yeah, don't go too silly, but obviously if they're in a condition score 2 or below, we can't really have them left like that either. And also just when we're trying to keep those feed into them, not just smashing them with feed straight up and allowing them to adapt to that new feed as well.
Yeah, everything slow and steady. In relation to vaccinations for our cows, so heifers and calves, will get 7-in-1, you said? Yeah,
so anyone that's breeding animals really should be using the 7-in-1 over the 5-in-1. So
what's the 6th and 7th?
The 6th and 7th is 2 different strains of leptospirosis. There is some benefits to the cattle themselves from being vaccinated for lepto, but the biggest reason we recommend using it is because there's actually a human health implication as well. So particularly for people that are breeding stock, if you ever need to pull a calf, that's the most likely time that you as a person are going to be exposed to leptospirosis, because it lives in the urogenital tract of the cow. And the other thing with lepto is that it's very good at getting through any sort of abrasion in the body. So if you've got any damaged skin surface, it will get into the bloodstream very quickly, and lepto can be quite devastating.
For the humans?
Yeah, for people. Yep. Yeah. So cattle can often shed it but not be unwell. Yep. So that's the danger, is that a lot of people probably don't realise their cattle are carrying it as well. And certainly in the dairy industry, it's a bit of a non-negotiable, particularly when you're milking cows, because it's also shed a lot in urine. So particularly people that are milking the cows, they love to come into the shed and wee everywhere, and often there's someone standing underneath them. So yeah, the lepto, as much as anything, is for human health as it is for the cattle. Yeah,
so always 7-in-1 you'd recommend vaccine?
For any breeding animal, If you have steers and you're just running steers, 5-in-1 is perfectly appropriate, but the 7-in-1's pretty essential for breeding animals.
Yeah. So what about some trace elements? Are we doing any trace elements?
Usually, it depends on, obviously, your system, but the big one that's probably worth chatting about is selenium, because we're in an area that is very ubiquitous for selenium deficiency.
Ubiquitous?
That's a big word, isn't it?
That is a big word.
But a client actually pointed this out to me at a discussion group one day, and I went and researched it, and it is actually quite true. The selenium supplementation is really important for brown fat metabolism in neonates. So when they hit the ground, particularly in cold climates, the selenium plays a key role in keeping neonates warm for the first few days of life.
What's a neonate?
A newborn animal.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Sorry.
I might have to edit that one out then.
Vet language. Yeah, when we say like neonatal development, obviously looking at how they develop once they're born. Yeah, so the brown fat is quite important for keeping these babies warm in the first few days of life.
Selenium
and selenium contributes a lot to the appropriate metabolism of that brown fat.
Yeah, that's interesting. And selenium, like a long-acting, what is it, Salivin?
Yeah, what we recommend to people that have got known selenium problems as a first line is a Salivin at weaning. But there's lots of different ways to provide selenium to cattle. We've got clients that put it in their fertiliser. There's also rumen boluses. We could do a whole podcast on selenium. Talk for all day about it. But yeah, that's probably the biggest one from calf and lamb perspective with survival.
Now we can overdose though with selenium.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where getting a vet to design a program for you is really essential to make sure you get
it. And a lot of drenches and your multimins and everything now has a bit of selenium in it, so you've got to be careful, don't you?
Especially with sheep, because if you're doing an oral drench and you're doing a U-guard or something else, all of a sudden you could accidentally give it 3 times without even realising it. So yeah, it's very important to keep in mind.
Yeah, and what about the short-acting mineralised? I've got in my head's multi-min, but it's a brand name, obviously.
Lots of different ones available. Yeah. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. There is some data out there that would suggest for those really high-stress periods, the multi-min, what it does is it enhances liver storage of those trace elements. And it's more, those sort of multi-min type injections are more designed towards animals that have got a complete ration, but you're trying to optimise performance. So they're certainly not designed to replace or to fix a deficiency across the whole herd, if that makes sense. It's more looking at priming things before high stress periods like calving and joining.
Bit of a Band-Aid.
Yeah, and not a Band-Aid as such. It's actually, in my opinion, it's a different use of the product compared to your longer acting injections that are designed for actually a different purpose, which is to fill a deficiency, whereas your multimin's for sort of a different application of topping up liver stores prior to high stress periods, and they often go quite hand in hand with complete rations with pellets and things like that with dairy animals. So yeah, slightly different applications.
All right, we'll keep going down that complete ration, and we're looking at now, we've got the calf on the ground. For those data heads that like to talk in MEs and proteins, what sort of numbers are we looking at feed-wise?
Look, certainly for your heifers that are still growing, they need 12 to 13 megajoules of metabolisable energy per kilo of dry matter. So that's quite high quality pastures sitting at about 12. Your heifers are really at the top of it, and I then trickle down and look at the...
So we're supplementing something to get...
Sometimes they do need to be supplemented, If your pasture quality is not top-notch for growing heifers, then some sort of loosened silage or pelleted formulation may be needed to keep them ticking along, definitely.
And protein still at that stage, or is it more just MEs?
I find the ME is the harder target pre-calving to hit than the protein, off memory, and don't quote me on this, I think it's around the 9 to 10, which is a little bit easier to achieve than, so it's certainly not as high as your recently weaned stocks.
What we're going to talk about now is just a bit of paddock selection. So if we do have a bunch of paddocks to select from, what are we looking for for cattle? We'll talk about sheep later, but cattle, what do they like in a calving paddock?
I think cattle do a little bit of shelter like the sheep do. So some sort of tree line or some sort of sheltering in some manner can sometimes be useful. It just helps, I think, to make the cows feel less exposed to the elements and also to predators. They are still prey animals at the end of the day. So keeping that in mind when selecting a paddock. But probably the biggest thing from an animal health perspective is having it well draining so that we don't get a massive accumulation of mud and faeces, because the biggest probably diseases we see around calving time are scours in the calves, but also things like mastitis and uterine infections post-calving in cows, and that's a direct sort of reflection of calving paddock hygiene most of the time. And to a lesser extent, nutrition. There is some evidence that cows are more likely to have uterine infections if they experience a really heavy negative energy balance at calving as well. So the nutrition comes into it as well. But certainly, picking a paddock that can stay relatively clean and dry is preferable.
What about mob sizes in cattle? Is that a thing that...
Not really to the same extent with sheep. I know plenty of people that will carve down 800 cows together and don't seem to have any major dramas. I think it's as long as the producer can know their stock and know who's calving and who has calved and things like that. It's probably a bigger challenge with those bigger mobs for the staff than the cattle. Yeah.
And do you like to collect any data from calves when they're first born? If we can weigh animals, do we ear tag straight away? What are we doing?
Everyone's slightly different, but I think I've certainly tagged calves as they're born, and it's not as hard as you make it out to be in your head once you get used to it. If you can get them really while they're nice and young and you can get up to them on a buggy and jump out and just get a tag on them really quickly. I think it's definitely good so that you know which cows are having which calves and you can actually trace them in. Or the other option you can do is you can put the tags in at marking and then follow the cows around afterwards
just
and write down whose calf belongs to who. But I don't know many producers that weigh calves at birth, but I think it is a good thing to do.
What weights are we aiming for in cows, do you know?
Around that sort of 40 to 45 kilos. Anything bigger than that and you start to have issues with dystocia and things like that.
And then lighter,
the lighter, there is a bit of information out there and data that would suggest that the really low calf birth weights can be associated with reduced calf vigour, especially when you get to the really extremes of low calf birth weight, because obviously with EBVs, which are amazing, you can avoid those enormous calf birth weights, which are going to be a higher risk of calf mortality during birth. But there is that sweet spot, definitely.
Yeah, and once a calf is on the ground and it's had its first drink, are we in the clear, are we? Or what? Are we worrying about the calves once they're a week old?
Once they've had their first drink, I think you can definitely breathe a bit of a sigh of relief and see that they are drinking. Probably the things I'd keep an eye on is generally their routine is that they'll have a drink, then they'll go and have a sleep. And if they're not doing either of those two things, I'd be a little bit concerned, and making sure the cows are still mothering them as well. The other thing to probably just keep an eye on is the cow's udder, because the other big thing we see a lot after calving is mastitis as well, particularly if calves are drinking off one side preferentially over another. We can get issues there as well.
Yeah. Now we're checking calves in the ute or the motorbike or whatever it might be. What have you got in your bucket or your bag?
Obviously tags, this is speaking on experience of looking after other people's farms, but yeah, what I would probably have is a calf tuber so that you can tube any newborn calves if you need to. Your calving box that's got all your first aid gear if you needed to pull a calf at any point.
What's in that? Obviously gloves now, I learnt.
Yeah, look, gloves are good. Like I said, with lepto especially. I don't always wear shoulder length gloves, but I'll always put rubber gloves on to do a calving. But also disinfectant, because cows will get poo all over their vulva, so giving it a good clean before sticking hands in is really good. Proper lube. A lot of people don't have lube on their place, and you can cause a lot of trauma to the cow's vagina if you don't have lubricant. And proper calf chains or ropes as well. I personally use a pulley for pulling calves. Some people prefer jacks. It's a bit of a polarising thing in the vet industry, whether you're on Team Jack or Team Calving pulley. But
what's a jack? I don't know what a jack is.
It's sort of a ratchet system that sort of distributes the weight against the back of the cow and pulls the calf out that way. I personally just don't like them because they take up a lot of space in the car. And also the pulley's got
something that actually sits on the back end of the cow.
Yeah. It's sort of a horizontal bar that then pushes into the cow's perineal region. And then, you apply your chains to the calf, and it's a ratchet system that the push goes against the cow's back. Yeah. They are pretty simple, and some people love them, but I just prefer a pulley. Particularly for some of the things that we do as vets, a pulley's just got more applications as well. So you can use it to pick feet up and things like that as well. Yep.
So we got those things. What else have we got in the calving bucket?
I think towels are really good as well, just to clean the airways out when they're first born. Probably the other thing is an umbilical disinfectant as well. If your calf gets delivered into a muddy yard or something like that, there's methochlorhex formulations that are really good. I try and avoid the iodine-based.
It burns, does it? Or?
Yeah, it can cause quite literal holes in the body wall. The chlorhex metho-based ones are preferable for that reason.
Do you do any calcium injections for the cows?
After calving, there can be a bit of an issue with milk fever. And so something I actually learnt recently, particularly with drought feeding, is obviously when we're drought feeding with large amounts of grain in the diet, we'd often advise people to supplement with limestone in the feed at around 1 to 1.5% of the ration. And that's because it offsets the calcium phosphorus balance that's a bit out of whack with the cereal grain being put into it. But interestingly, with cattle, it's actually advisable to take that limestone out right before calving for 3 weeks. And a lot of research has gone into this area with the dairy industry, that basically if you deprive the animal of calcium in the lead up to calving, what happens is they get much more efficient at harvesting calcium out of their bones, because basically they can't...
They get lazy otherwise, do they?
It's to do with how they metabolise calcium, essentially, because they can't actually consume enough to meet the sudden demand of lactation. So the body has to be able to synthesize it from bones to go back into the bloodstream, just for that window of time right after calving. What's actually advised is you actually take that limestone out for 3 weeks and then put it back in when they do calve, so that they're much more efficient at harvesting that calcium and using it to produce milk and also function as a cow. Whereas the opposite of that is true with sheep. So because sheep are more likely to have problems with milk fever prior to lambing as much prior to lambing as after, whereas cattle, most of the time, it happens after calving.
Is it purely because of volume of milk that they're producing? Yeah,
that's right. Especially with even your dairy cross beef cattle as well. It can be a drama. But also older animals can have issues with calcium metabolism as well. Yeah, sometimes just doing a bit of a mild calcium restriction coming up to calving can be useful. And in the dairy industry, they've got lots of lead feeds that will do that for you. So you put it in the diet and it does that hard work for you.
Yeah, we're getting nervous. We're coming up to calving. I'm getting nervous, Chelsea. All these problems. Anything else on the cattle before we go across to the sheeps?
No, I don't think so.
No. All right, let's talk about the sheep now. Because a couple of slight differences as I've been listening. Pre-lambing treatments, what's the most important for the ewes up to pre-lambing?
We always would advise it, pre-lambing drench, unlike your cattle.
Now I've got a question for you. Are you a long-acting or not?
Again, that's probably an entire podcast on its own. There is a lot of moxidectin resistance floating around, and we've diagnosed that on quite a few local farms. So what you can do, and there are better experts out there than me, but I'll try my best to explain it. But what can be useful is to do a primer drench and then do your long-acting injection. And then what we do is monitor the worm egg count whilst that long-acting moxidectin's sitting there in the background. And once those worm egg counts start to come back up again, then we advise to drench again with a tail cutter. So that's to minimise the acceleration of resistance from using those long-acting moxidectin drenches.
Yeah, just quickly talk about the primers and the tail cutters, because a priming drench for a long-acting moxie, what would you be using?
Ooh, that's beyond, not off the top of my head. I can't really remember.
Yeah,
what we'd use,
I think the important thing to note is that it's a different family. It's not
and it's something that you don't have resistance to as well. So something you know is going to knock down the worm burden effectively. So a minimum of 95% reduction in worm egg count.
Yeah, and similar to the tail cutter, because the majority of those worms, if they come back within that time frame, is all going to be resistant to moxie.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's that concept of refugia and what's left behind, which is going to be resistant. So you don't want what's left after the moxidectin to build up on your farm, because then you're just going to get more compounding resistance.
There's potential for long-acting is what you're saying, but with some caveats.
Yeah, and like I said, there's better people out there that probably ask than me that would definitely know more about them, but it's worth knowing. Like I said, the main thing is just to be aware that there is moxidectin resistance floating around, and
along with just about every other drench at the minute.
Yeah, that's right.
It's getting a bit tougher.
Scary.
So we're drenching vaccinated as well?
Yeah, like with the cattle, there is definitely benefits for sheep and lambs as well if we vaccinate with a 6-in-1 or 3-in-1 prior to lambing as well. Yeah. And you could even do that prior to, at the time of your pre-lambing drench as well, give them the vaccine. And there are products out there that even do both in one injection. So
we actually, they get a whole bunch of needles at our farm, poor girls, before lambing, but it definitely does help, we've seen. What about condition scoring for sheep? And a lot of people now are going to scanning ewes. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a huge correlation between the ewe's body condition score at lambing and the survivability of the lambs themselves.
Off the top of your head, do you know?
It's between 3 and 3.5 is that sweet spot, And the main reason for that is just because if ewes are not starving, they're going to mother their lambs a lot better. So if they're not out searching for food, they're going to be protecting those lambs a lot better. Yeah.
I heard an interesting fact as well, that a triplet-bearing ewe cannot physically eat enough of anything to even maintain condition score in very late pregnancy, just because those 3 lambs or 4 lambs physically take up too much room. Which was an interesting. So you actually got to get them there a bit quicker.
Yeah, and dairy cattle after calving are in the similar sort of boat at their peak lactation. They physically can't eat enough to, in really high performance breeds, they're in a similar boat. They physically can't eat enough to put condition on, that they will lose some degree of weight during that period, and that does represent for both classes of stock a bit of a problem, not only for that period but also getting them pregnant again if their ovaries decide to shut up shop as well. So
how long is peak production in milk
for cattle? It occurs at 6 weeks, so it's a bit of it peaks at 6 weeks after calving, and then it gradually tapers off until 2 months prior to the next calving.
Is it a fairly linear drop then down to...
Yeah, it's a pretty consistent drop from there on.
Are we separating twins and singles in the sheep?
That's definitely a good idea. Like you said before, your twin-bearing ewes have got a much higher energy consumption compared to your singles and represent a much higher risk, therefore, for mismothering and things like that. So if you can separate them so you can better allocate your resources, which is your supplementary feed, I think that's definitely a great idea. And I don't think I've met anyone that started scanning their sheep that reckon it was a waste of money or something they'd ever consider not doing in the future.
We've been scanning for many years now, and we have a lot of problems with singles actually if you don't monitor their feed because we get lamb stuck.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably more of a problem, is it, with them getting too fat?
Yeah, for sure. And then the lamb just growing too big and they're getting cast or lamb shoulders stuck. And it's not only benefiting the twins by lifting nutritional requirements, but it's also restricting those single girls. Yeah. So it's been a very valuable tool. I'd recommend it highly. You mentioned briefly with twins disease in sheep. What other things are we looking for in sheep before lambing?
So that twin disease being your ketosis, but also they can be quite susceptible to the milk fever as well. So that's a calcium deficiency. Unlike your cattle, which can benefit from some calcium restriction prior to calving or lambing, your sheep are actually best to be on calcium right up until the point of lambing. And even sheep that are on pasture would benefit from calcium supplementation. I read an article recently that it's probably much more of a subclinical problem, the hypocalcemia, than we realise, even on pasture-based systems. So, yeah, having just a loose lick with a bit of salt in it for palatability could probably go a long way, I think, for a lot of people.
With the, is it the same as the cattle you give them?
As in the ratio?
No, the limestone.
Yeah, just the plain old limestone. And you can even mix cause mag in there as well to get a bit of magnesium in as well.
Yeah, and just attract it with the salt.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm assuming there's lick blocks as well.
Yeah, there is.
Calcium blocks.
I think the loose licks sometimes are just a bit more palatable. We certainly advise loose licks over the solid licks for cattle. I don't know what your side of the fence is like with sheep, but the loose licks are often a lot cheaper as well because you just buy the raw materials and mix it up yourself.
Yeah, I think it's easy just to roll a block off the back of the ute. You got to keep the other ones out of a bit of moisture. But I don't know if there's a preference for most producers out there. And you mentioned the condition score for sheep around that 3.
Yeah.
There's obviously going to be risk if they get too fat?
Yeah, so either side of it, you start to see problems with lamb survivability. So if they get too fat, as you said before, you start to get problems with dystocia, whereas if the condition score's too light, then problems with mismothering and starvation as well. If they're not producing much milk, especially if there's twins, there can be issues with the lambs not getting enough as well.
Yep. All right, mob sizes. You're not a sheep girl, I know that.
No, but I looked this up.
Oh, you did?
I did.
Tell us.
And it's actually quite a linear relationship between the two.
Yep.
So the lower the mob size, it's read somewhere that there's 2 to 2.5% reduction in mortality for every 100 ewes, which I did not know. So,
Yeah, we had Nathan Scott, who's a bit of a sheep guru, on last week, actually. And he said the perfect mob size for a twin-bearing ewe is 1. And
Such social creatures.
Yeah. So they want to be by themselves when they're lambing.
Yep.
Obviously, they're a flock animal, and that's actually part of the problem is that they'll start stealing each other's lambs.
Yeah.
They want their own space, sort of thing.
Yeah.
He actually said, what does work well is around about that 50 to 70 mark for twins, which sounds low, but he's breaking them up with electric fences now. He said a twin ewe doesn't normally try and take on an electric fence, so they're quite happy to stay in their side. And good results there, which is good. And singles, he said there shouldn't be an issue with any mob side, actually. If they can't raise a single lamb by themselves in a big mob, then they're probably not worth being part of the operation, he reckons.
Yeah. Interesting. The thing with cattle, though, is there sometimes probably is a bit of a benefit to keeping heifers separate to cattle, though, just because heifers are often subordinate compared to the cows, and especially if you're feeding out and things like that, heifers are more likely to be bullied. Yeah. So, sometimes if you've got really big farms and managing heifers separately, because they need more feed and they need more high-quality feed, but they're often at the bottom of the pecking order, sometimes having your heifers separate for that reason can be worthwhile. So
when we are lambing, what would you carry around as similar as your lambing tub?
Yeah, probably the only other thing I didn't mention before is if you've, for the same reason as marking and things like that, having pain relief handy to give to animals that have if you've got to pull a calf or a lamb, I think if it's hard enough that it's warranted your assistance, it's probably warranted to give them some pain relief as well to help with that mismothering, particularly with your sheep, but also with your young heifers and things like that. If they're standing in the paddock and they're sore, they're probably not going to want to mother their calves particularly well. So, that's another thing I'd probably have in my toolkit.
Do you want to know one of the things that I have in my toolkit for lambing? It always surprised me, but duct tape.
Yeah.
It's been the best thing, and that's the only thing that I'll make sure I have, if nothing else, is duct tape, because if we do have to treat a sheep with a stuck lamb or something, the first thing I do is tape her front legs up.
Ah.
And then she can't run away.
Yep.
And we'll pull the lamb, put it at the mum, and leave the duct tape on and walk away and come back a couple of hours later, ideally 3 or 4, and cut that duct tape and disappear. And we've found that actually to be very useful. You just got to make sure you remember the duct tape. So, but it's quite good. And if you need to transport it then as well, like on the back of you can tape them up, and they're not going to jump out halfway home. So
restraint when you're in a paddock calving or lambing anything is really challenging. It's really challenging. Yeah, I've seen some crazy stuff over the years, but I'll often just also get a halter, which is a good thing to have handy as well for cattle, and I'll tie the head to the front leg. Yeah, can sometimes be enough just to, or also if you've got another vehicle, tie the cow to the vehicle. Yeah, always the client's vehicle.
Yeah. And smash the car up.
But yeah, having something to restrain them is definitely handy as well.
You mentioned before too about stripping colostrum out of the sheep. We take Ziploc bags.
Yep. So good idea. We carry the calf tube feeders around as well, so I'll often just put it into there as a temporary vessel as well. But yeah, Ziploc bags are a great idea because they go into the freezer. Yeah, really nicely
flat, and
as well.
They defrost well in some warm water.
Yeah, that's true.
If need be.
Yeah.
What else?
I think probably just to keep an eye on sheep's udders as well, because sheep are also quite prone to mastitis.
Yeah, there's that black mastitis too, which is pretty nasty.
So in sheep it's often caused by Staph aureus, which is a really nasty bacteria. It'll cause a lot of damage and destroy a lot of quarters and things like that. So I think also keeping an eye out for sheep and cattle that have had that, especially in a drought condition sort of environment where you need to look for animals to maybe offload as well. Those ones that got busted udders is a good one to start with as well.
Yeah. So you won't instantly cull a cow if it's had mastitis?
It depends how bad it is, and if the quarter's completely blown, it probably depends on the client's herd dynamics, and if they're looking to grow it, I probably wouldn't just get rid of a cow for that reason on its own. If you're looking for ways to destock your property because you're running out of feed, I would certainly keep that in consideration. Yeah. And that's where records are really important, so you can identify those animals, because sometimes looking in the paddock, the udder might look fine, but when you actually have a feel of it, it's full of scar tissue and things like that.
Yeah. All right, just one other thing that does come up, obviously, is mismothering or abandoned lambs. What's a good sort of practice if we want to try and save that lamb? What are we doing?
Yeah, with cattle, I generally just advise to yard them together, and you can also just put the cow in the crush tube 3 times a day and get the calf on it as well to make that cow stand for its calf. And once it gets into the routine of allowing the calf to drink, sometimes you can get them, mothered back up. For sheep, it's a bit more tricky. And certainly if you're going to hand rear them, probably the biggest thing is keeping them warm, because they suffer from hypothermia very quickly. And, having a good quality milk replacer to put them onto as well.
Like you said, that colostrum, if you can save some colostrum.
Yeah, the only thing is, if they're over 24 hours of age, you've missed the boat a little bit for colostrum.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Having said that, like if you've got an animal that's got scours, for example, feeding them colostrum can help a little bit, because it gives them antibodies in the gut where the scours is coming from. But that's the problem with colostrum, is that that's why it is such a big management issue, is that you've got a very finite window. And what happens is at 24 hours of age, they can't absorb the antibodies in their entirety anymore. So the gut has got special gaps in it when an animal is born, so that they can quite literally engulf the antibodies in their entirety. But once they hit 24 hours of age, those gaps are complete. That's what the whole gut closure comes from, is that those big gaps that allow the antibodies to be absorbed, they just disappear. They firm up and you can't absorb those colostral antibodies anymore.
This stuff blows me mind sometimes.
So that's why vets go on about it so much, is because it's a very finite window and it's a very important thing for that newborn animal.
Yeah.
And there's also the other problem we see a little bit is once they start drinking, if they have their first drink, that closure process starts. So if they have a little Peasley drink very early on but then stop drinking, they can get inadequate colostrum transfer as well. If
we did, say, collect some colostrum, how many mils is an ideal sort of first feed? Usually 1 to 2 litres for cattle. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
That's ideal. And sometimes that can be over multiple feeds, but that's like the volume that they need in its entirety to get a proper passive transfer.
So it might be over 4 feeds.
Might be over 4 feeds, but yeah, that's the volume. And certainly on dairy farms where time's of the essence, tubing 1 to 2 litres is quite standard practice.
They can do,
and they can handle that quite fine.
Right. Fill up those gaps.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
there you go. Lambs, I wouldn't even know the amount, but it's about half a Ziploc bag.
I was going to say, I can't remember the exact volume with sheep either because it's been so long since I've had to stomach tube a lamb, to be honest. And we just don't get called to many lambings, to be honest. It's not a big part of practice.
I think we were talking about this a few weeks ago, you and I. You wouldn't see a whole lot of sheep stuff because if we've got a sheep issue, if we can't deal with it ourselves, depending on the value of the sheep, it's normally not the value of a call out for a vet. And so producers go, whatever, if you got like 10 dead lambs or something, then we might make the phone call and say there's this common thing happening. But you probably don't see enough, or we don't call you guys out enough.
No. I used to do a few lambing for hobby farmers, but certainly haven't for quite some time. So I don't know. I sometimes wonder, do sheep lamb on their own, or are producers out often pulling them out themselves? I wouldn't know because we don't get called about it.
I can tell you last season between here and home, I don't even know if I pulled maybe one lamb. Yeah. But we have had years, and it's normally depending on what size we used. Yeah. And so we moved away from that again because we had a lot of troubles. But
I think it reflects veterinary practice a lot more as well, because even with cattle farming, I reckon the number of calvings we're going to is getting less and less as those EBVs for calving ease and calf birth weight and things like that pop up, and the nutrition side of things gets better and better. Yeah. I think certainly when Alison graduated, going around doing calvings all day was just that was what being a vet was, and that's certainly not the case anymore. Yeah,
and I think you just touched on it very briefly then, that nutritional side of thing, the better we can have a healthier animal, we try and breed them so they can do the job themselves without human intervention. And sometimes, I'm talking from a sheep point of view, I think cattle are a bit different, but sometimes we cause more problems by going into the paddock and checking than just staying away and letting them do what they're naturally going to do, as long as they're in good health and got the right environment. All right, Chelsea, there's a fair bit in that. If anyone wants more information, reach out to either Chelsea at Herd Solutions or here at Gippsland Ag. We are coming up to the calving, and I've seen some fresh lambs on the ground, so people started already in the district. But you're not going to get away without the final question, Chelsea. What's something that you've learnt that's surprised you?
I finally thought of something right at the last minute. Yeah. I was reading an article the other day. Remember how we were using those AI search functions, but the power consumption of them, and I'd have to fact check this, but
hang on, we'll just go back. AI,
artificial intelligence, and the power consumption that goes behind a lot of those searches and running those search functions.
It's huge,
from just drawing on every bit of data that's available and has ever been available.
And they must be, I'm staggered at how quickly they can respond. So they must be doing a lot of stuff before we even actually asking them questions, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Like, I read one quote that, like, the AI power usage is comparable to some countries, and I'd certainly have to fact check that. But I thought, when you think about it, like, they are drawing on a lot of information. I wonder how plausible it is. And then I think about all those stupid videos and cartoons and things you see that are made, and you think, oh God.
And the poor old cows and sheep are getting the blame for all the carbon emissions put out there. That was a good one. Thanks, Chelsea, for coming in. I hope your weekend is a good one and you can have some time off.
Excellent. Thanks, Al.
A big thank you for tuning in today. And remember, if you have a question about today's episode or a topic you'd like us to cover, reach out to one of our many platforms and join the conversation. We're here because of your passion and commitment to agriculture. Together, we can build a stronger farming future. This episode was brought to you by Herd Solutions, your local farm animal vets, servicing Maffra to Mallacoota.
This podcast is made possible by the Future Drought Fund Regional Drought Resilience Planning Program, co-funded by the Victorian and Australian governments.